Hey everyone, and we're already in June. Where does the time go? I'd like to introduce to you a wonderful guest, Marjorie. Now, I know normally I roll out a newsletter, but week is a very important month for her. Did you know that on June 1st is the Day of Parents in Canada? It's also the Accessibility Week, and it kind of gives away what we're going to talk about. Marjorie is very accomplished. She is a researcher, psychologist, speaker, author, consultant, and she does so much more. But more than that, she's an amazing mom. And her story has touched my heart in a way that I cannot describe it. May it inspire you in the same way as it inspired me. And may her wisdom touch your heart as it has touched mine. Enjoy this week's episode.
What was the moment in your life that you never expected that was going to be your greatest blessing?
Oh, okay. So when you hit strong from like the get-go, because I'm already crying. I already have tears. And the tears are there because it's an event that, it's my accident that first came to my mind. And obviously my accident and me becoming paraplegic is not a fun moment at all. Everything that came after is excruciating pain for years, and sorrow and grief, and challenges and facing barriers and fighting and just like being in survival mode for so long while raising a 16 months old that kept growing. But as you ask that question, and as we are like 12 years later, I realized that event has led me to seeing parenting from the standpoint and the perspective of parents with disabilities in a total new way, in a very personal way. And that it has also given me a voice to be able to potentially and hopefully make changes in my world and in the world of every parent with disabilities that will come after me or that are here with me at the same time. And so the most surprising moment, probably the most impactful.
Did you expect that question?
Not at all. And I didn't expect my answer. I'm not sure if you had asked me that a few years back, I'm not sure I would have said that, because there is so much anger, and there's still anger, and there's still like the tears were there because the tears acknowledged the pain and the grief and the growth. And that's the thing. It's sort of like and the growth, like it's not just painful, and there are some great things that came after it that I want to celebrate too. I lost part of my career for a while. Felt that I couldn't. I just couldn't keep up with all the roles and with my physical limitations that I had while raising a young son. But yet it allowed me to be home during the pandemic, for example, where I was able to raise Thomas and focus on him. And because we didn't know how COVID would affect my health, my breathing, because I have about 70% of my breathing capacity and my lung capacity since my accident, we stayed home for 18 months, with my mom and Thomas and I, that's it. And so me being home meant we knew we would be safe, but also that we would be together facing this that was so difficult, while other people were actually going to work and putting themselves, in difficult environments. And so it's sort of like you could see how an event could be both things, could be something that brings grief, but also something that brings joy, or that has joy and may not bring joy, but you could still be joyful even though you go through something difficult.
I like how you said it. You can even go through something joyful being difficult. This week, I've met a lot of individuals who are holding so tight on their pain and that they think it's part of their character and they can't let it go. Did you ever have those moments?
100%. I had those moments for at least 5 years. So about 5 years after my accident, I burned down. Because at first, when I had my accident, I was in the action. I was fighting insurances. I was fighting for my career. I was, just like in action mode. And then something happened in my job. They did a whole reshuffling of careers and at that moment, I felt in a depression that lasted. It was heavy for 5 years, where all I could see was like the grief and the anger and the sadness and the fighting and all the negativity and all that my accident brought. That was ugly. That was unfair. I'm a psychologist and I was helping people. And so I felt like, oh my God, but I'm helping people. How could you do this to me? And you being, I don't know, an entity, the world, life, God, whatever you want it to be. And so I was very angry. I was angry at but I'm doing everything right in my life. And yet still this, happens. Yet still I'm not protected. And so during, those 5 years, it was intense. It was very intense and dark all the time.
How did you pull out of it, if you don't mind me asking?
I think something happened, and something is being a psychologist, I got sort of notification of new trainings, and I saw a training that caught my eye. So even though I was not working, I was still looking at those lists, and it caught my eye because for the first time I had seen something together: positive psychology. So in psychology, the way I had been taught and trained, it was through, we use the DSM-4, there's sort of Bible, now is DSM-5, where you list sort of all the diagnosis and their symptoms. And so it's very sort of symptom-based and what you don't have. And it's a bit negative, I guess, in a way. A lot of people would see it that way. And so for me, it was sort of what do you mean positive psychology? How does that turn? And when I attended the training, it talked about character strength. And I was like, character strength? What is that? And so I wanted to know more. And that triggered me. One of my character strength is actually my top one is love of learning. So I dwelled into that. And even though I couldn't concentrate for very long, I could still sort of concentrate enough to read a little bit, each day and sort of build on that knowledge that really we have strength, and that in front of adversity and barriers and obstacles and difficult things, we could still sort of use our strength to see the joy and celebrate the joy and hold on to it. And that it's something that we built. And so the teaching or the learnings that I got from positive psychology really gave me a different perspective. And all of a sudden it was even in my accident where I felt very powerless and helpless because I felt like it happened to me, right? Well, I learned or realized that in that moment, I had used a strength of spirituality, which is not a strength that I use on a regular basis. Actually, I don't. But I had prayed to God to sort of live and to have my arms, because at first I was going to be quadriplegic, nothing below my neck was moving. at that moment. So I asked for my arms because I wanted to be able to have strength to be able to take care of Thomas as a single mom. I used prudence because once I felt my arms moving again, I said, I better not move to make it worse and wait for people to come in and rescue me. And I used love to just hold on to, all the strength and all my capacity to be able to survive the accident in the first place. And so that language and that perspective made me see that even in the most incredible, dire moment, I still had a say in how I was going to react to it and adapt to it. And so that gave me...
in the moment when that happened to you.
Yeah, in the moment I had those reflections, but I hadn't seen that as powerful. I had seen that as like, oh yeah, that's just because I love Thomas. And I thought, oh, love is just like, love is my second strength, the one that I use the most. And so for me, it was sort of like, but I didn't know it was a strength. And so it was just like, it's just a feeling. It's just like, whatever, like any mom would do this. They would like react the way I did. And in having the language and learning that love, yes, it's a feeling, but it's also a very powerful strength that we can have and conjure, like sort of like ask to come and help us. And in my case, it was sort of like that strength that helped me focus on what I needed to do to survive even the car accident. And so that gave me power. In hindsight, it showed me that I had power, even though I felt very powerless at first during that moment.
I really like how you debunked it, because I am going to come out of my own little shell and say, I struggled a lot when psychologists would tell me about positive psychology. It would bother. It wasn't because I wasn't loving or anything. I always felt like it was used as a sort of, if you can't handle your negative stuff, let's just put a plaster called positive psychology around it. And in these last few moments, you've just broke it apart, probably because you have this certain, what I call reality check on it. And then you layered it like, no, it is possible to love and leverage it in a way that it gets you out of the belief system of, I can't get out of it, into I can get out of it. And you just did that in like 5 minutes. Where were you all my life?
Where was positive psychology all my life? Or 7 years earlier.
But
yeah.
How, I know we started off and we haven't explained what accident you had, but before the accident, were you a driven person? Don't sit, that mom, that person that was like, I don't have time for this. I got my career going. This is the forwardness of it.
Yeah.
Were you like that? So, and then what was you before and then after, if you can share with me?
Yeah. So the before, I was what we call, type A personality. I guess I'm still type A personality, but I had to adjust a little bit my expectations. But before, it was sort of like, look, I was working full time. I was on call 7 days a week, which meant that I could get a call, an emergency phone call, to deal with a client or a resource that we supervised in the middle of the night. That could happen. I had a 16-month-old that I had on my own. I was a homeowner, and I was also teaching two courses.
Where was the time for you in all of this?
Oh, I still had time for me. Yeah, I still went out with my girlfriends. Yeah, on weekends and stuff. Yeah. And if you ask me now, like, how did you do it? I don't know. If you ask me to do it again, I would say, are you crazy? Like, no, I can't. I don't want to either.
Yeah.
but it took me sort of years. I mean, it's, I think I had, it was like an addiction, the adrenaline but I was super organized. Like you can't believe how, like, the morning, I knew exactly, like, everything was timed. I would wake up 15 minutes before Thomas so that I could sort of get ready and get dressed and get organized. I had prepared the lunches beforehand, like the night before, so that I was ready for the morning. Like everything was sort of timed so that I could do everything, really. And I thought, yeah, I was handling things pretty well, doing that. And then my accident happened, which is a car accident. Like I said, Thomas was 16 months old. And just like that, I mean, it took a few seconds. My car slid on black ice. I got hit by a much larger truck. It severed my spinal cord. And so I was paraplegic. And you can't recuperate. Research maybe in the future will lead to recuperation, but not in my case, not at that time. And so all of a sudden, like, everything stopped. Not only everything stopped, but like I had to retrain how to breathe because I was intubated because I had surgery on my spine.
So you woke up and from here down, right?
Yeah. So when I woke up in the car, I couldn't feel or move anything below my neck. That's when I prayed and asked for my arms because I could feel my legs were also not well, but I was like, at least if I have my arms, I can hold him, I can pick him up, I can like do things with my arms. Like, you have to give me back my arms. You can't just like leave me with like nothing. I mean, give me a challenge, but a challenge that I can sort of like do something with. That's what I felt anyways. And so I prayed 4 times. And after those 4 prayers, I could feel my fingers move and I could feel them. So basically my injury is here. Anything like under my armpits is, I can't feel and I can't move. So in my prayer, one of the things I often told myself, I was like, shit, if I had known, I would have asked for a little bit more, like my abs a little bit or something. Because really, I have exactly what I asked for. I have my arms. That's it. Like, because just like one vertebrae above, and I would have like part of my arms.
It's like I should call this title of this episode, Shock and Grace Meet Each Other.
Yeah.
If you were paralyzed from here, I cannot even remotely, I don't understand what compassion or empathy would be like because I can't put myself remotely in your shoes. I have a lot of admiration for having that, going through that, just that moment and staying present with God. And I don't speak about God often at all on a podcast, but that's what it feels like. But then from here down, you even said you had to retrain yourself from breathing. So in that.
Yeah. Because I don't have any abs. I don't have control over my abs. And so part of the diaphragm needs the abs muscle to sort of push air out.
Okay.
And so I don't have access to those muscles. And so that limits my breathing capacity, so about 70%. So if I were to choke, which it has happened a couple of times since my accident, I really can't cough out whatever. And so I need to push on my belly as I cough, or else I can't cough properly. Yeah, push in to be able to cough properly, or somebody has to push in as I'm coughing, or else I don't have the strength to expel whatever, like the mucus or whatever else would be in my lungs. So getting a cold, getting a, like a flu or COVID, well, the hypothesis is that it could really have a huge impact because I wouldn't be able to cough properly, and coughing has a purpose.
Have you?
I wouldn't be able to.
Did you get COVID?
No, I didn't.
That's what. Thank you. I'm graced for that. So that means you were
Thanks.
really one of the, what did they call them? In over here, they had they protected very much a lot of those who were, why is the name word escape me? My uncle also, he wasn't allowed to go out. He had a lot of restrictions. He got frustrated a lot, but it was for his own good because it was for his lungs. So you must have been indoors pretty much.
Well, for 18 months, Thomas didn't go to school. He did schooling, online, which was very little, unfortunately, but better than nothing. So we were glad. I supplemented in the afternoon, which was kind of nice because we had that time. And then my mom would take him on a walk every day so he could do some exercise because my mom was also pretty much inside with us. My mom is older. So she had to be protected because of her age, but also because she didn't want to sort of transmit anything to me.
Yeah.
So we did what we could.
I have to say, I'm in complete admiration for you. Not because of your mental state of mind, how you stayed very sharp and balanced. But I'm sure there were moments that you might have wanted to feel the opposite.
Yeah. I would say that it's easy to seem this way in hindsight. And when, I think there was a lot of healing that needed to occur for me to be able to look back. When COVID hit, a lot of people sort of reacted and they were like, okay, within 2 months it's going to be over. When I heard about it, I actually pulled Thomas out of school 4 days before the government pulled all the kids out of school in Canada. So I sort of had braced myself, and I knew it was going to take a long time. And for me, it was vaccination that I was waiting. So I was like, vaccination is not going to happen like in 2 months or 3 months. It's going to happen in a year, in 2 years maybe. And so in my mind, it was sort of like, okay, that's it. So I think it was different for me that period because I was playing the long game. I knew I was going to play. I needed to play the long game. It wasn't a short game for me. When other people, I think, were still expected that within 2 weeks or within a month or within, another month and so that's hard when you don't know or when you're not pulling your resources and you're sort of going like, oh, I'm still going to stretch it out a little bit more, like for me, sort of like I'm stretching it out over 2 years. And so my frame of mind and my perspective, every time they came back and said, oh, no, we need to, another 2 months of isolation or whatnot. For me, it was like, oh, yeah, it's within the time frame. And so I could focus on other things and pull my resources towards something that was more meaningful, which was and more meaningful and useful, which was to sort of like teach Thomas, go out on walks to make sure that we each got some air, exercise, got to be in nature, stay sane. I found classes on meditation. So both Thomas and I learned meditation during that time so that we could incorporate meditation so that we wouldn't sort of like just fight it off, because all of a sudden we were 24 hours 7, around each other. Yeah. And so it was sort of like, what are the things that I have control over? And I'm going to focus my energy there. It's tough.
It is. And I'm thinking, you're 24 hours, you've leaned really into your strengths. Like you said, you were very organized before everything. And it seems to me like you plugged it right in for the long game.
Yes.
You had that. Then there is the strength of love. And then you chose, okay, I'm going to do things with my son, meditate. So you leaned into your that learning strength of yours. And so I'm amazed how you bring it so fluidly into your life, or it seems fluidly, or I love the word they say in Dutch is nuchter, which is very grounded. You know, you're like, okay, look, practical. This is what's going to happen. And then you leaned right away into your strengths. And a lot of individuals, they will tell you, well, yeah, it's easy for some. And like I said, I'm going back to this conversation where people think that by their negativity is their character. And you pivoted and you said, lean into your strengths. So as a parent, when you just realize that you're going to be functioning from here, you got this and this not. You wake up literally from one day to the next of how you were going to parent to how you are going to parent now. What was that process like, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah. I think that's where I had the most grief. I remember waking up and I say every morning, but it was probably every a few hours when the medication ran off, just crying because I was like, how am I going to do this? Because I was doing it all myself, like we talked about, in a very organized fashion.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I mean, you took away, and at first I thought it was just my legs, right? Oh, you took away my legs and my house is now inaccessible because my house was on 3 levels. How am I going to make this work? Now, as I went through rehab, I learned that being paraplegic is not just not being able to walk, but it affects everything. If I can't feel or move anything, any muscle, that means I can't move or send a message to my bladder, to my bowel, right? So there's all of a sudden more than just not walking. Yeah. So I have to adapt. I have my phone and I have alarms that are set every 5 hours to remind me that I need to empty my bladder, for example. And so all of a sudden, even in parenting, that meant, okay, so if we go out for the day, I need to find a place where I need to have an accessible bathroom in the middle. And it also means that somebody, because it takes me about 10 minutes to empty my bladder, I need somebody to be able to watch Thomas during those 10 minutes because there's no way he's going to be in the toilet as I'm doing this. And so all of a sudden, in terms of like, and maybe like you said, it's pulling my strength of like being organized. And my day was sort of like, well, if I can't find that bathroom in the between, then it means we're doing just one activity because that's all I can do. In between those 5 hours, I can do something, but I need to, sort of plan it accordingly. And so it was really about reframing everything in terms of how much I drink, how much I eat, what I eat. If I go out or Thomas has a hockey game, will I be able to get in the arena if they didn't shovel the ramp, for example, which happened often. And so it was, all the time I'm calling ahead. I'm like reserving places. I'm canceling on places when I realize that they're not accessible. And so it was sort of a building. But what really gave me the fuel of doing all of this and reframing and learning, it was really my strong desire to be or to become the adult I wish my son would become. And
is that your motivation till today?
Yes. Yeah. And so sometimes I do things that are really hard and that I find really hard. And I do them and I remind myself that I'm doing it so that Thomas can see that we could still learn, even if when we're adults, we could still apologize and realize when we were wrong, and we could still make amends. And in all of that, I want him to know that in whatever happens in his lifetime, because challenges will happen, that at any point, even if it's hard and makes you cry and yell and scream and whatever, you could still sort of like pull your sleeves up the next day and do one thing, even a little. And then the next day you could do another little thing until you're able to do a much bigger thing. And it's okay. And it's okay to ask for help. And it's okay to be, interdependent with other people and to realize that and to accept it. That was very hard for me. I was a helper. I was not helpy before my accident. And so I had to learn that. And so that's what I tried to be. I tried to be the adult that I want my son to become. And so I need to become that person so that he knows that it's possible.
Can I ask you a very sensitive question?
Okay.
I like to ask it this way because a friend called it out. Somebody I met a few months ago, he called it out. I went to speak on a stage and there was a ramp going up, but there was nothing to be held. And there was this gentleman, elderly gentleman, he was walking up and my instinct was does he need help? And I'd go there. And my friend gently just put his arm right in front and he says, he didn't ask for help. And I was like, he's right. He didn't ask for help. He goes, if he needs help, he will ask for it. How would you did you ever get annoyed with people like me? You gotta, I mean, like, what would you?
So I have a similar encounter.
Okay.
I was just a few weeks ago or a few months ago in Hawaii, and my whole family went hiking that day, and so I went shopping on my own. And so I was outside and I was like rolling. And at one point there's like a little ramp, to get onto the sidewalk, and there's a hole. So I had to do a little wheelie, and then I lost my sort of power. So I had to readjust, and then I was going to get over the hump. And I see a lady that comes near me who is about to put her hands on my wheelchair to give me a push as she's saying, hey, wait, I'm going to help you. And then before she touches the handle, she goes, oh, no, sorry. No, that's right. You don't need help. You're here. Obviously, you don't need help. What am I doing? I'm so sorry. And like is about to like just run because she's like ashamed. And I called her and I said, no, that's okay. I mean, it's okay. You saw that I was struggling a bit.
Yeah.
It wasn't like fluid, my movement. You asked for help. I mean, as long as you ask to me, and you ask politely, to me, that's okay. Because sometimes it is hard to ask for the help. And so for me, it's okay. Now, if you were to ask someone who has been, who's born with a disability, they might have a different answer. Because to them, it's sort of like, this is my life from the get-go and whatnot. I still have issues sometimes in struggling to know what I can do, what I can't, how strong I am, and also sort of having that, I often say I had a lot of privilege before my accident, and I didn't even know it, how much I had. Mm-hmm. And my accident showed me that, oh, wow, I lost, I lost status. I lost status because I don't have a career the same way that I did. And that created a lot of frustration for me. It was like, wow, like seriously, like I knew my clients didn't have as much privilege or standing, and that's one of the reasons why I was there to help out. But then it was like, oh, wow, even in like how I framed, oh, I'm here, the white woman here, educated, going to help out because they need help. Well, no, they don't really need help. We need to educate society. so that we recognize their strength, or so that we recognize their voice, and they're like, they can say, and they can have opinions on how they want to raise their children, and might look different than, the norm, what we see on TV or whatnot. But as long as the child is sort of growing, and is safe, who are we to say that this is not a good way to educate a child? Anyway, so it was bringing a lot of issues. So sometimes for me, it's all of that, sort of like I struggle with internalized ableism, as we call it, sort of like knowing my strength and my position as a disabled woman, or just even recognizing that now I'm a disabled woman and that disability is part of me and my identity, and that I have to sort of integrate it. So it's interesting. It makes for very interesting conversations in my mind sometimes.
I had a conversation a few weeks ago with a gentleman who I asked him this question. I was like, the word disability, for some people, that's no. Some people have different points of view. It's a controversial. And he goes, it's, whenever I write disability, I put this and then I put the A in capital. I want you to remember ability. What do you think about it, the word disability?
Yeah. So in French, which is like my mother tongue, there's actually a harsher word. And so in French, we still call it handicap, which is a total no-no in the English world. And so I struggle with handicap because I feel that the handicap, it's the situation. Yeah. Is the situation. It's the environment that makes it handicapping in a way, right? So that's one of the issues that I have. In terms of disability, so a few years back, probably about 5 years, I produced an event calling many different parents with disabilities to share stories, like positive, joyful stories of them and their children. And I produced that event twice, 2 years in a row. And the first year, I called it Parents with Diff Abilities. And the second year, I called it Parents with Disabilities.
Okay. And the second year?
DIF, the first time, yes. Disabilities, just the word. And it was, I think the change was, I was reacting the first year and all of the years prior to the fact that I felt that we didn't focus as a society on the ability part. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't want people to see that I have less abilities. I wanted them to see I have different abilities, because I did see how I learned to do things differently. An example is that I give often is when I came back home after rehab. So 6 months I was in rehab. Thomas was being raised by my parents. I come back home and I'm so happy because I'm going to put him in his high chair and feed him supper. And so I pick him up like I would when I was standing up. But then I got caught in sort of like right here because I had my leg and I couldn't get close to the high chair. And that for me was one of the losses that I had, because all of a sudden I couldn't put my son in his high chair.
That is huge.
Except that 3 years, it is huge. Yeah. Except that here what happens 3 years later. So my sister has her fourth child, Ben. And Ben and I would often sort of stay back because all of the walkers would sort of go and play. And him being a baby, he was stuck in the high chair or in the car seat, and I was in the wheelchair. And so I would keep him busy. And we created like great connection, him and I. And so one time he's like 2 years old. He comes to me and sort of points like he's hungry. He wants to be fed and be put in the high chair. And so I go, okay, well, put your feet in my footrest here. Put your knee on my knees, sit on my lap. Mm-hmm. Now don't move. I'm going to get closer to the high chair.
Yeah.
And then you're going to put your foot here, and I'm going to guide you with my arm, and you're going to twist. When I say go, you're going to twist your bum and you're going to sit. Well, all of a sudden, I was still capable of putting a child in a high chair. I just needed to figure out how I could do it. And I needed to figure out how I could do it in using his strength, like the child's strength and my strength together. Yeah. Interdependence, teamwork, collaboration, great skills, to learn and to teach, because I'm also teaching sort of, yeah. And so Ben and I mean, when I go and visit my sister, Ben sometimes will say, oh, Tata, let's go. We're going for a walk. And so my mom will go, oh, I'll come with you. And Ben will say, no, we've got this. It's Tata and I. We're going together. And my sister's has high, steep hills around her house, and a part that is not accessible to me. But Ben knows. And so sometimes he'll say, oh, there's a hole here. I'm going to help you out if you want. I'm just going to give you a little push. You don't want, that's okay. You can do it. I know. And then that's it. And that's the conversations that Ben and I have when we are on our walks. And that's because he adapted. He knows what I'm capable of. He knows what we can do together. And so do I. And so we adjust as we go along. And that is the beautiful part of growing and learning and realizing the difference. If I go back to disability, I'm not scared of the word disability anymore. And I think that's why I'm able to use it, because I could still see my strength within the disability.
What I love is that in your sharing of the story is that he learned to respect you. And by respecting you, he's accepted you as you are for who you are, and that you are not your limited abilities. No, you are more than that for him. And I think that is just beautiful. I mean, that's a story. That's a story of many layers. Mm-hmm. And with Thomas, did he ever ask you? Did he ever have different questions for you as he was growing up? Because he saw you at 16, so he's always seen you 16 months. So he then grows accustomed. But has he ever come back and asked you questions, or was there ever that moment where you're like, oh, it's that kind of conversation?
I would say that one, he doesn't really remember me walking. There's a few pictures in his room where, I'm pregnant, so he sees I'm standing on my two legs. There's a picture that we have where I'm teaching him how to walk. And so I'm holding his hands. And so we cherish those pictures. But for him, it was never he doesn't see it as a loss because he doesn't really remember it. And I would say that to answer your question, it was a bit always part of the conversation. And so I had Thomas via insemination. So I'm a solo mom. I chose to be a solo mom. And so when I took that decision, I was talking to a psychologist, and she was like, whatever you do, just feel comfortable with your decision, and be able to openly talk about it.
Yeah.
And your child will be adapted to it. It's going to be part of that's nothing. And during teenage years, he's going to resent you for something else. And I was like, okay, well, the disability is the same thing. I'm, as long as I'm okay with the disability, and yes, sometimes we get angry because I can't go somewhere. And so he chooses not to go if I don't go. And so it could be frustrating for that. And it could be creating losses. When my family went hiking, I was a bit sad. I wanted to go hiking with them. But in the same time, I didn't want them to lose out. So it's sort of okay, but it's okay to acknowledge that and to sort of say, I'm sad I can't come, but I want you to go, and so that's what it is. And as long as it's open, when Thomas, was growing up, the first 3, 4, 5 years old. We're in soccer practice. The kids are asking me, why are you in a wheelchair? And from the get-go, I was like, if anybody asks in front of my child especially, I will answer as honestly as I can, because I want him to be okay with the fact that I'm, in a wheelchair. It doesn't really matter. It's almost irrelevant to him, because we do what other families do, or we do things differently, but that's okay. It's what we choose to do together that really sort of matters. Yeah. So he's okay with it. I'm okay with it. When we're not okay with it, we acknowledge it and we talk about it. And so, he resents me more as a 13-year-old when I sing
Really?
than because I don't walk. Yes. I'm a terrible
Could you
singer.
sing?
Yes. So, no, I'm not singing.
I almost wanted to ask. I was just like, oh, don't.
Yes.
What is the most... Have you ever acknowledged the one most beautiful thing about yourself in this whole process, or how has it been for you?
Oh, that's a good question. And I guess you probably hit something that I'm not good at. Yeah. I'm pretty sure a lot of people around me would have, good answers in terms of
I think so too.
what makes me beautiful. But me, that would be a struggle. Yeah.
All right. Can I nudge for just one? Because I'm a nudger.
Yeah, go ahead.
So
Okay.
What is that one thing you would say that makes me beautiful?
The love I show the people around me, like my loved ones. And that would probably include the kindness that I can show them also. Like I'm really intentional in making sure that the people I love know that they're loved by me.
Is it easier for you to receive love now?
As you could see, he's still struggling.
Yeah.
Yeah, still struggling. I will receive it, but sometimes I feel like I will receive it from my family, from my friends. I would say that the part where I like the biggest struggle is like romantic love. That is,
but that's huge. That's also another huge part.
It is. Yeah.
And is it huge for you?
That's where.
Is it huge for you? Was it huge for you before the accident as well? Or is it huge for you now, even more now after?
Yeah. I was in a relationship for 4 or 5 years before my accident, or even before conceiving Thomas. I was really, really in love. And that really broke my heart. So I think that was like the struggle after that relationship, which led to me sort of saying, like, I'm just going to have like a child on my own because I don't know when it's going to happen again. When I had my accident, I was on the mends, meaning that I had started dating again. So I was like things were looking up in that aspect. And then I had my accident, and then it all sort of like broke. So yeah, and now it's hard. It's hard for me to see what I could contribute in a relationship, or that someone would be okay with all of me, including all the aspects that creates grief and anger, because I can't do this, or because life is not easy. My daily life is not easy. It was easy before. It was organized, it was busy, but it was easy. I could run to the store at any point. I could do anything without asking for help or waiting for somebody else. Now it's like, if I want to garden, and take the weeds out, I have to figure out a way. If I want to try a new sport, I have to figure out a way. If I want to go to that concert, I really need to call them and make the right calls to be able to access the, few accessible tickets. It's not easy in my life because of all the things that all of a sudden, like doing one thing could mean that I have 10 steps to do before I could even think or consider doing that one thing. And so that makes me wonder, okay. And then I always have the risk in terms of my medical or health wise. I could be at risk of sores that would make me sort of bed rest for several months. Or I could have a UTI in repetition and be on antibiotics for, and I could have also bladder or bowel incontinence at any time. And so who would want to mess with that? And so those are the thoughts that I have when, and I guess that's the part where I could see all the dark and the negative, and I'm still struggling to see the positive or why someone would come in a relationship with someone like me.
I would tell you that you have, it's not out of encouragement or admiration. I would go on a day with you only because you're very organized. But then I'm not a guy. That's all I got to say.
Yes.
You're an amazing soul to me. Today you surprised me beyond words. You surprised me because I love what you said. Sometimes you challenge yourself to do the things you don't think you're able to do because you want to be there and show your son and motivate him to be better at that. I think that in its sentence encapsulates who you are as a human being. And I think that's most beautiful. And so there's one thing there's two things I'd like to ask you. One is, you've made me very aware more than anyone else how accessibility is still so inaccessible. You made me very aware of that. And even in our first conversation, I remember walking back and feeling somewhat angry that, it's not about I'm privileged, I want to save the world. No, it wasn't that. It was just angry. It was like, why, I want to know you not for your physical. I want to know you for your heart and your mind and what you bring to the table from your personality. And here, this accessibility not being inaccessible, you don't realize how much of an impact it was. And you really brought that to light for me because it impacts also who you are. Because like you said, you got to think 10 times before you can say, okay, to this, when we spoke about the retreat in Curacao, and your eyes lit up, you were just like, oh my God. And then you shared about how you travel only close by, and then you went to Hawaii, and it was like, there's so much we could still do. So my question is, what do you wish that could be done that is the most important thing that hasn't been done yet?
In accessibility?
Yes.
Or in anything?
Well, you can answer both. I like both of them.
Yes. I think the big thing for me, or what would really sort of change the way that we do and conceptualize and design common spaces and private spaces as well, is that for the longest time, we thought that people with disabilities could not do anything. Or if they did, it was because somebody else, an able-bodied person, that would help them do it. What we need to realize is that there is autonomy and independence, no matter how able we are in our bodies, in our mind, and so forth. But if we took care of and really thought hard on how we can make sure that we could be abled in all spaces, no matter what disability or abilities we have, that would change the world for, more than a quarter of our population, because we are people with disabilities. We're a quarter. 1 in 4 person has a disability.
1 in 4?
It's a lot of people.
It's high.
1 in 4. It's very high.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to rethink the space, not in terms of like being able-bodied, but being, in all kinds of bodies and capabilities. And until we make that shift, we're going to continue building apartment buildings with stairs, or offer services that, I don't know, don't have sign language, or so a good portion of our population would not be able to even understand or communicate with one another because we're not considering them.
And also,
so that would be, but it's a big thing.
And also, can we ask French restaurants to be bigger? They're a bit bougie. Yes. They're a bit bougie on the small, but they're really bougie on the space.
Yes.
But I do agree. Yes. Space is crucial. I do see that. Because that also limits, right? I'm not kidding about the French restaurants in that way. When it's tiny, it's not.
No.
It's not thought out.
I mean, for me to get in, like I've been to France a couple of times since my accident. Paris is not a city where I stay because, everything is so small and has stairs and, I was like, I'm not even tackling, accessibility there. But you're right. Doing this or reconceptualizing accessibility or how we design spaces will take many little actions, but it's about sort of working all together, able-bodied, disabled bodies, and trying to figure it out together how we could do that.
So you asked me initially, is it just on accessibility? Now, and you asked me, well, in general. So what would be in general? What could we change in general?
Well, in general, and it touches about accessibility, or it has sort of a link or a connection. It's, that's sort of like ableism. We need to tackle that. We need to tackle those concepts of how we defined productivity, performance, success, and until we do that, we are all going to struggle because those standards are very high for everyone.
Yeah.
I have not yet met anybody who could do it all, like those standards that we have for ourselves so I think it's something that we should all sort of work together and tackle together so that we could change that.
Well, I know we're coming towards the end of our conversation. I'm asking you on the podcast again and again. You just didn't realize that, but what I wanted to ask you is, if you wanted, in our conversation today, if you wanted someone to take one thing away, one thing for them to reflect on, to consider of all of it, what would it be?
I would ask them to think about, just like you did actually, to meet one strength that they think they have. That's sort of like, really at the core of their identity. And then to reflect how that strength is useful to them, and how maybe that strength, when they overuse it, could be sort of, detrimental, or sort of like hindering what they really truly want to achieve. And just having that conversation, or that reflection around, their strength, I think will change perspective maybe for some, I'm hoping, in terms of what makes us beautiful and powerful as human beings, and resilient, and strong and kind, and all of those things that I think a lot of us aspire to.
I'm going to leave it on that note, but I'm going to share that what you've asked for everyone to get to be closer to is who I see in you. Kind, resilient as, I can't swear on this podcast, but as resilient, loving, and very giving, and courageous. And I really appreciate you sharing that with us. Thank you so much. And yeah, you're not rid of me now.
Oh, that's good, because I really enjoyed our conversation. And it's interesting because we've met twice. Yeah. We've had 2 conversations. And every time I am left uplifted and joyful. And so I thank you so much for the gift of those conversations.
You made it easy, Marjorie. Thank you.
You make it easy.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode. What did you think about it? What were your reflections? What were your thoughts? Did you know, if you're on Spotify, there's a poll where you can share your thoughts and views. Do hit follow and subscribe, and do share it with someone who might get a lot of value from listening to this week's episode. Until the next one, take care.